Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see so many of you here. I know some are still getting coffee. One of the participants here said that next time we just need to turn off the coffee machine so that people arrive here on time. I think that's something to keep in mind for the next Hamburg Sustainability Conference. But I'm glad that all of you made it here to this future talk where we're talking about peace building for securing sustainable development. My name is Shoo. I'm a journalist and a TV presenter. I work for Germany's foreign broadcaster Deutsche Welle, and I have the honor of being your facilitator today. Now, it's the year 2024. We have 6 more years until 2030, where we want to have ended most of the world's most pressing issues. We want to have reached the Sustainable Development Goals. But if you read the Sustainable Development Goals report, which the UN brings out every year, I can tell you it's a very depressing read because every goal you look at, every sub-goal you look at, it says, not on track. We're not on track when it comes to ending poverty. We're not on track when it comes to ending world hunger. We're not on track when it comes to gender equality, etc., etc. Now, the good thing is that what we will be discussing here today might actually be the key to rescuing all the other sustainable development goals. So Achim Steiner is here with us today. He's the administrator, so the chief of UNDP. And yesterday during the opening ceremony, he said words that really have stuck with me and I've been thinking about ever since he said them. He said that there's no development without peace, and there's no peace without development. So these things are interrelated, and that is what we want to be talking about today. And even UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, when he was presenting that report on how far we've come in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, he said that the world now needs to come together to really make peace a priority, which is Sustainable Development Goal number 16. So we want to look today at what communities can do. We want to look at community-led efforts that can help us in bringing peace, securing peace, and in that way also bringing about sustainable development goals. And I'm happy that today we have the heads of various UN agencies that deal directly with peace building, but also with sustainable development goals. And so we will hear from them. We'll also hear from different regions in the world. First of all, we will hear from Armenia. And I'm happy to say that we have the honor of having the President of the Republic of Armenia here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Vahagn Khachaturyan. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to attend the Hamburg Sustainability Conference and would like to thank Germany for these initiatives. The goal of conference is better future for all on healthy planet. Are we reaching our goals fast enough? And have we met all requirements for it? Alas, not. When I looked through the program, I deliberately picked up the panel entitled Peace Building for Securing Sustainable Development, since it is a subject of utmost importance for Armenia. Regretfully, peace building and peacemaking are pressing issues, not only for my country and my region, but also beyond, and the current situation in the Middle East is a vivid example. One should admit that currently we are facing the highest number of violent conflicts since the Second World War, and the people's insecurity is at lowest level ever. Thus, societies and individuals are unable to exercise the latent talents and full potential, since there is permanent risk of a new war or conflict. Having said that, we agree that the challenges we face can be addressed only through stronger international cooperation. From that perspective, I would like to welcome the recent adoption of the Pact for Future by the United Nations, led by Germany and Namibia, aimed at strengthening international cooperation and promoting sustainable development. Peacemaking and peacekeeping have helped to end wars, prevent conflicts and tensions from escalating into the full-blown violence. And in this context, let me bring my country's example. Deployment along the Armenian-Azerbaijan border of an unarmed civilian and armed civilian monitoring mission of the European Union play a critical role in minimizing border incidents for the last 2 years. As it is stressed in the pact, we hope for a world that is safe, peaceful, just, equal, and sustainable, a world in which well-being, security for all us. Financing for development, green transition, and sustainable is the goal of our efforts in addressing those challenges with focus on developing countries and countries in special situations. We need to reform the international finance architecture to enable effective financing for development, which will take into account the specific needs of middle-income countries. We are also trying to initiate new approaches for helping the developing countries to meet their needs. One of such initiatives, the debt for climate swap mechanism, which we propose to use in the climate finance context as a useful of developing countries in return to their climate change mitigation efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2030 agenda stands clear that there is no sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. Driven by this very philosophy and strong commitment to peace, the government of Armenia is taking action to bring peace and prosperity to the region. The government introduced the Crossroad of Peace initiative to unlock economic potential of the region and economic and culture, thus contributing culture taste, thus contributing to the political dialogue and achievement of a comprehensive peace for all of peoples in our region. We hope that our efforts will be reciprocated by all interested countries, both in our region and beyond, to achieve peace and turning our efforts towards sustainable development and green growth. In conclusion, I would like to once again thank the German government for its invitation to this important new initiative and wish every success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Khachaturyan. Thank you. Let's do the swap of water first. Thank you very much. So you mentioned something that is very important. You said that peace building and sustainable development is not only important for ending conflict, but from preventing conflict to happen in the first place. And you told us about the efforts that are already happening in Armenia, which has seen a number of conflicts over the last years. So thank you very much for sharing that perspective. And now I want to invite my panelists, because we're gonna be looking at sustainable development goals and especially peace building from various angles. So please join me in welcoming, first of all, Dr. Robin Geiss. He's the director of UNIDIR, which is the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. A warm welcome to you. Please go stand here. Welcome. Then we have the executive director of UNICEF, Catherine Russell. Please join me on the stage. You can stand next to Dr. Robin there. I am glad to introduce the administrator of UNDP, Achim Steiner. Please welcome. And we're very honored to have the Foreign Minister of Cameroon, His Excellency Lejeune Mbela Mbela. Please welcome to the stage. Yes, let's do this. You're welcome. So, Your Excellency, I've just been informed that you will be speaking in French.
Yes, where it's the language where I am more fluent.
All right.
I don't want to be misunderstood.
Yes, yeah, of course, and we all want to get your message very clearly.
Yeah.
So right now, that means that we will need to do some logistics here because people were not informed in advance. So everybody, including me who does not speak French, should get a headset. I believe that the headsets are outside. I don't know if they'll be brought to us or if people, I don't want people to leave this conference hall. So if we can get some headsets, please, for the people who do not speak French, that would be wonderful. Okay, I hear that we're not getting headsets, but anyways, we're just gonna go ahead and then we'll solve that issue as we move on. Because Robin Geiss, I wanna start with you as somebody who is in charge of research on disarmament. We're looking at community-led efforts to end conflicts and also to, you know, like re-include people in their communities after a war has ended. So as we get closer to 2030 and we're looking at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, how is the presence of weapons and ammunition hindering us from reaching those goals?
Yeah, thank you, Liz. It's hindering us in each and every way, and you won't be surprised. I have a whole PowerPoint presentation set up to,
Go right ahead.
to make that case. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And let me just say it's really great to be here and great to see that Germany is organizing and hosting this important conference at such a critical juncture in history. I'm particularly pleased that we're here at the Future Talk Forum, because I think the Future Talk is intended to take us onto new avenues, provide fresh impetus, some new ideas, if possible, and I find that very fitting for a UN security disarmament think tank. But it's also high time that we explore some new avenues when it comes to disarmament in insecure environments, because they stunt development, as the Secretary General has recently said, in each and every way. Of course, Achim Steiner said it yesterday, peace and development, security and development are inextricably interlinked. It's an obvious truth, at least it should be, but in practice, all too often, that simple truth is ignored. And I find, especially when it comes to weapons and weapons collection, disarmament approaches in vulnerable communities, we neglect the developmental side of things and really look through a prism that's almost exclusively security. And that might be part of the explanation why so often it doesn't really work to disarm vulnerable communities. And recently, as you know, world leaders have gathered and agreed on the Pact for the Future. They have committed, and this comes at a pivotal moment, to redouble efforts to build and sustain peaceful, inclusive, and just societies and address the root causes of conflicts. And this couldn't be more timely because, as you've heard from the Armenian president, the situation is extremely bleak. In whichever way you count, there are more conflicts now ongoing than there have been in decades. Many of them protracted, many of them prone to relapse. 60% of conflicts since 1946 have relapsed once they were finished. And we do know that, so it's extremely hard to get out of cycles of violence, to get out of these conflicts. And we do know, of course, that weapons are a major risk factor when it comes to protraction of armed conflicts. They really do cast a long shadow, and not just in the security dimension, they cast a very long shadow also in the development dimension. They impede the realization of the SDGs in so many ways. Now, I know we're pressed for time,
Yes,
so
yeah.
in very...
So, yes, I want to know, why is it so difficult to disarm these communities?
Okay, well then, I'll jump ahead here.
You prepared something, you know, but you can just go ahead, you can briefly touch on.
No, I was
the
just going to
effects
show
there.
you, but I think the audience will know that weapons availability and access to, of course, impedes access to education. This is just a small example to give you the idea, but in Zamfara, Nigeria, there was research done. 33% of school-age children dropped out of school because of the violence. We do know that 2.5 more girls drop out of school than boys. So there's a big issue, education. Another issue is conflict-related sexual violence. 70 to 90% of reported incidents involve firearms. This is UNIDIR research, and it's very recent. And then illicit economies, of course, illegal mining, wildlife poaching, all this is furthered by the availability of small arms. But to your question now, why is it so hard? It is so hard because communities that face ongoing insecurity, the approach traditionally has often been disarmament to zero. We want to take away all the weapons instantaneously. And that seems like a logical conclusion.
Absolutely.
But of course, if you're in an insecure environment, people have a strong sense and urge for self-protection, self-preservation. That's a strong disincentive to surrender the weapons. And even if you have, buy the arms kind of weapons programs and you extract the weapons, they return sooner than you think. So there's the issue. I think the perfect sometimes can be the enemy of the good. 100% disarmament to zero, instantaneously in very vulnerable and insecure communities in the past, very often has not really worked. And I could show you many examples where people have picked up arms and just any kind of arms to protect themselves when they do have that perception of profound insecurity.
Okay, so how does disarmament work? Is there a step-by-step approach? What needs to happen first? What needs to happen next?
Well, I think what we should try more, the idea has been around, but it hasn't really been tested much, is community-led arms control. Not disarmament full-fledged, 100% right away, simply because we've seen it often doesn't work, but we empower communities to engage in arms control programs. We aim at silencing the weapons rather than extracting the weapons all at once.
So they should have guns but keep them at home and not use them?
Well, the community should take control over the weapons, step by step. It's a stepped approach. This is risky. This is not an easy one. States want full control, armed forces want full control. We're fully aware that this is not easy. This is a major challenge, but it's not like other approaches have worked very well in the past. And as a think tank, of course, we can take the luxury to experiment with these community-led programs. So it would be about silencing the weapons rather than doing away with the weapons, which will return very quickly anyway. Not engage in the perfect approach, but a more pragmatic, potentially very bold approach. That's what we're up to. That's what we invite others to engage with us in this kind of research, and that's the next steps for UNIDIR.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Robin Geiss, up to this point. Your applause. You're asking us to take bold steps. What I just want to tell my audience is that today we're not doing the typical panel discussion where they're gonna be, yes, Your Excellency, let me come.
No, it's okay.
Yes.
I thought no,
I was hoping that you're telling me that you're gonna speak in English.
You want me to speak? You want me to speak on?
Yeah, 1 second. Let me go to Catherine Russell first, because we've heard the perspective of UNIDIR, but of course, for UNICEF, you're putting children, the youth, at the center of peace-building activities. How does that work exactly, and how does that factor into sustainable development goals?
Well, I think building on what has been said, if you can imagine all of these crises in the world, all of these places where there is armed conflict, there are obviously children living there, right? We estimate over 460 million children live either in places of conflict or are fleeing conflict. That's a devastating situation for children. Why? In some cases, they're impacted directly. They're shot or killed, or we've had many cases of children, even in Gaza now, where children have lost a limb. And just to put that into your mind, if an adult loses a limb, we can replace it. If a child loses a limb, we can replace it, but every 6 months it needs to be reassessed because children grow, right? So the consequences, the things that are happening to children in these situations are devastating. In just another example, in Sudan, we have 17 million out of the 19 million children in the country who are not in school and have not been in school for a year. Right, so children are particularly vulnerable in these conflict settings. And I think from our perspective, there's no question the most important thing is to stop the conflict, however that gets done, right? And in many ways, that's above the pay grade of the children in these communities. They don't start wars, they're powerless to stop wars, but they are definitely the most directly impacted by them. So we do a lot of work in UNICEF of trying to build peacekeeping ideas into the programming we do so that children from a young age learn that there are better ways to resolve conflict than to fight, right? And I think we've seen in limited places that those can be quite effective. I mean, we have, in the DRC, we have over 300 what we call peace clubs in the eastern part of the Congo, where the children come together and they learn how to solve problems and the importance of that. And it has definitely reduced violence in those schools, right? So we know it can work. The question is, how do you take that to scale and take the lessons that the young people learn? To me, it sort of reminds me a little bit about climate. Like, young people know, right? We got to do something about climate. They have to persuade the old folks like us, well, I should speak for myself, like me, that need to do more about this. And I think, we can do it. When we work with communities, a lot of times we'll find tension over things like water, places where there are limited resources. And again, we try to work with the communities to resolve the disputes. So we're very much on the ground building these ideas of peace building and peaceful approaches to things into the work we do. But the truth is, adults need to do better by children.
So the children are like the peace ambassadors, and they are the ones that need to learn the lessons and then speak to the adults that surround them. So let's talk about preventing crises from happening in the first place. What is important, of course, is to address the structural causes of conflict. How does UNICEF approach that?
It's incredibly challenging, honestly, because if you look at the conflicts now, I came into my position, Achim knows this, just 2.5 years ago. Since then, 2 weeks after I started, Ukraine happened, right? That's based on decades, if not more, of conflict and dispute between different forces. Then Gaza, now Sudan, now Lebanon, we just keep adding these conflicts. And so I think that as a world, you can try to come up with lots of reasons for why this is happening. The world's more polarized, the power shifts have taken place. Again, from our perspective, from the UNICEF perspective, we don't have the capacity to solve those things up here. Mm-hmm. We have the capacity from the bottom up to try to teach children, help children come along, and to try to show leaders what kind of impact these crises are having on children. They are literally destroying their childhoods. They're setting them back in a way that these countries will never have peace if these children can't get educated, are not healthy, and not able to participate. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Ms. Russell. I want to move to Achim Steiner, bring you into the conversation. We heard your opening remarks yesterday, but now I want to talk about community-led efforts for peace building. UNDP works together with local initiatives. Why is that important, and how does that work exactly?
Well, let me first of all say there are two moments, so to speak, in a nation's reality. One is, we just listened to President of Armenia speak about how you take a development perspective in moments of tension and crisis. I think one of the perhaps most troubling lessons we have learned is that there are always tensions in a society, and it starts, when you sit around the family table and you have disagreements, and then it becomes a community, and then it becomes sectarian. The question is, how resilient is a society to these tensions? And I think one of the things that we have all learned, and President, you just spoke to it as well, how do we make that vulnerability less risky? Because that's where societies fall apart. And what we observe in the most recent human development reports also looked at this phenomenon of uncertainty, insecurity, people beginning to turn inwards. Then the political narrative starts turning our neighbors into our enemies for reasons that often are purely Machiavellian, if you want, because they want to essentially leverage the fear of each other for political ends. Outside neighbors can often also fuel conflicts, and sadly we see a lot of that happening in the world today. So if you take a development perspective, you first of all begin where a community is most at risk, which is to turn either against each other or to turn against their neighbors, so to speak. And I think our lessons have been very much trying to understand where are the greatest risks. Sometimes they literally have to do with a phenomenon that is as simple as inequality perceived as injustice or unfairness. How do you address this? It could be the sharing of a particular resource. It could be income. It could be the perception that certain religious or ethnic communities have a greater share in the nation's wealth. And I think for us in UNDP, one of the big lessons we have learned is, first of all, to help government authorities have the evidence to understand what is driving these conflicts and what can government, sometimes very much at the local level, do to help people address this. I think the ability to deal through not only the lens of economics with these issues, but sometimes it is injustice and unfairness that are actually the real trigger. And we spend, unfortunately today in UNDP, a disproportionate amount of time in actually helping societies prevent development from being destroyed. And you know, whether it is in the Ukraine, where our focus there is to enable government to sustain its functionality so it can actually reach communities, to rebuild rapidly energy infrastructure. Some of these things are very much central government-led. But in other cases, such as in Afghanistan, we went right down to the community level and we homed in on women. Women enterprise or women-led enterprises in Afghanistan are in fact in their tens of thousands there, sustaining people, sustaining livelihoods, sustaining communities, preventing families from having to pack and leave their homes, their villages, and go and stand somewhere in the provincial capital in a queue to receive humanitarian aid. We have had to learn as a development organization to go upstream in understanding what is driving conflict, but we also sometimes have to literally start at the lowest level of rebuilding or even just enabling people to save their ability to earn their livelihoods and retain their dignity and their agency. Why is that important? Because communities that are wounded, that are traumatized, are not great peace builders. Mm-hmm. And that is why trying to help people to rebuild their livelihood, to have the pride of not being dependent on others, makes them stronger agents for also finding compromise and building peace. And often that can involve, as for example in the Sahel region now, where UNDP is involved with what we have called, you know, with the technocratic language, we have stabilization approaches. Mm-hmm. Central government is not able to deliver right now the kind of services that communities need. You have to rebuild the ability even to work together at the community level with local mayors, local religious leaders, community leaders. It's a form of governance reconstruction that is fundamental to a society be able to return to, let's say, a pathway where peace enables development to happen and development actually builds peace. So it's not just a slogan, it's actually something that I see every day in extremely clear terms in these conflict countries.
Mm-hmm. So let's get very concrete here. We're lucky to have the Foreign Minister of Cameroon, a country, of course, that over the last years has seen conflict, especially in the Anglophone regions where the separatists are fighting against government forces. You have the threat of Boko Haram, you have other jihadist groups, you have millions of people that have been displaced, you have conflicts also when it comes to the scarce resources, especially in the north. So we've heard different recommendations here about how peace building can best be achieved, and Achim Steiner said that sometimes the central government is unable to get into the communities, so community-led efforts are most important. What is happening in Cameroon in terms of peace building, and what are your recommendations?
Well, thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to start by saying that contrary to what is said, Cameroon is not in war. The country is very peaceful and the situation is very stable. We have a very strong administration and institutions. But nevertheless, in 2017, we had a political crisis in the far north region of Cameroon and southwest Cameroonian population. In fact, the problem was that some of the communities or some people so that they should change the constitution for separation between Western Cameroon and the Eastern Cameroon. We have two major situations in our country. The country is specific in the fact that we underwent the protectorate with the German, then the mandate with the French and the English, and then after the creation of the United Nations in 1945, we were placed under the rule of France and English. So we have this legacy, which in fact has brought some of the Cameroonians to say that maybe we should change our constitution. But we are a divided, we are a unified country. We don't go through division. Our constitution says that Cameroon.
So maybe that is exactly what Achim Steiner talked about when he said that sometimes one part of the country or a certain community feels like it is not being treated the same as another part of the community. So we want to move away from the causes of conflict and look into how to resolve conflict. So what is your experience and how is Cameroon dealing with that?
Well, the conflict, as I said, took place in 2017, and the President of the Republic found out the way we should solve this conflict.
How did you achieve that?
Well, we achieved it very, very well. First of all, the president saw that we cannot solve the problem only by the military issue. We should bring the country together for a dialogue. So he decided to organize a national dialogue under the Prime Minister, giving the responsibility to the Prime Minister to organize this national dialogue. The national dialogue gathers all the Cameroonians, the government, the civil society, the private sectors, the diaspora. So after the national dialogue, we came under a lot of recommendations. One, it was to make sure that in Cameroon, bilingualism and multiculturalism are really very strong to bring the communities together. Secondly, the president, the national dialogue made a recommendation to give a special status to the Anglophone regions, Northwest and Southwest. So this was really achieved. Third, we made sure that the chieftaincies, we have many chiefs, and we say that we should give freedom to all those chiefs to run the locality in a very wise and agreeable way. And third, we put in place an independent conciliator who is a kind of mediator between the government and the various communities.
So you're saying dialogue is important, policy changes are important, and then continuing, of course, that dialogue. Now, I want to touch, as we wrap up, because I'm looking at the timer here, it has already turned red, to go back to where we started with what Robin Geiss said about the presence of arms. Cameroon, how does it deal with the arms that are still in civilian hands in the country? Because I know you at the UN General Assembly, you talked about how it is important to deal with the arms situation.
Really participated to the initiative of AU, for African Union and the United Nations to put in place what the first speaker said, silencing the gun in Africa. So this initiative, Cameroon took part to the initiative. Secondly, the measure taken by the government for the circulation of arms is very strong. People cannot have arms anyhow. The regulation is very, very strong. Third, we took measures to really destroy many arms which were seized by the government and those small arms which were circulating in 2021. In the presence of various diplomatic missions, the United Nations, and the Prime Minister took the decision to really destroy all these small arms and very other arms which were seized from people who were not allowed to bear arms. And third, we are a country which is really strongly pushing forward the Kinshasa Convention. This convention is made in a way that many countries should really be part of the convention in order to prevent the circulation of medium-sized arms.
Thank you very much, Foreign Minister. Thank you for that input. As I had promised that we're going to give room for our wonderful audience, thank you for bearing with us until this moment. Now, the first person I want to call up, because we want to also hear what experts that are in the audience that are listening to what we have been saying, their take on that is. So we have Professor Dr. Anke Höffler, who is a professor at the University of Konstanz. She's an expert in development issues. And I just want to ask you, what do you think about what has been said now? What are your main takeaways?
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful to sort of see two panels on, so this panel and yesterday's panel on conflict. But I don't know what your takeaway was from the opening remarks by Chancellor Scholz and also the director of UNDP, Achim Steiner. My takeaway was very much that conflict is something that is holding us back globally. And I hope that we can have more of a dialogue in the Hamburg Sustainability Conference in 2025. So I found it really heartwarming to hear about all of the sort of grassroots, bottom-up, lived experiences. But I would like to ask you two questions about what the international community can do. So, as we see with the conflict in Sudan, let me just take it as an example. Both armies, the irregular army and the militia army, are being armed at a huge extent from different sides. Arms are they're not manufactured in Sudan. They all have to go to this country, and countries produce these weapons and ammunition, and we could actually control this much better, and we could intercept. Why are we not doing more? Why are we spending so little effort and money on trying to regulate arms shipments?
Thank you. If you allow me, we'll just take that one question so that we can also allow other members of the audience. My dear panelists, who wants to take that question? And please, a brief answer. Okay, Robert Geiss, you go ahead.
You know, I think we know what we would need to do. We have the Arms Trade Treaty. We could universalize it. We have many other good ideas. They're all on the table. It is, as it is so often in this day, a lack of political will, of course, of regional and geopolitical power politics getting in the way. And that is what is driving conflict worldwide at this very moment. And it is getting us into a sense where we're kind of searching for absolute security, which of course doesn't exist. And this is an escalatory spiral. You go further and further. And if you're doing that, you start neglecting the development side of things. I think that is the juncture at which we find ourselves.
But I don't think people in Sudan say we want absolute security. I think just...
No, I was talking globally.
Yes.
I was talking Sudan. No, Sudan, of course, is a dramatic conflict, one that is too often overlooked these days.
Yes.
No doubt, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just to add to that, I was in Sudan fairly recently. We do a lot of work there. It is a god-awful place at this point. There is so much violence. And I think what we at UNICEF have pleaded for on the international stage is to say first to the parties, and I've spoken directly to both sides and pleaded with them to give us access to stop the violence, to make sure that children can go back to school, where we already have famine declared there. I mean, it is truly a devastating place. But there are also outside forces, outside countries and others who are involved there, and we have pleaded with them to use whatever influence they have to try to make this stop. Because when a country like Sudan faces a challenge like this, the potential catastrophe that we're all facing, the countries around who have already taken in so many of the people fleeing, and the region as a whole, it's daunting to imagine how much worse this can get. And so I think anyone who has any power over any of the groups who are involved there needs to take every possible action to make this stop.
Thank you very much. Yes, question at the back there. Yes. Sir, I'll allow you. You with the laptop, I'll allow you to go first. Yeah. Brief question, please. Yeah, we'll get the mic to you. Mm-hmm.
Know that it's very easy. Countries who manufacture the weapons should stop selling them, because we cannot go to the United General Assembly and call for ceasefire, yet they are still selling weapons. And just to add also on the note of the children as well, that has been presented by Professor Robin, and to be fair also, because it's not a responsibility of the others, but also it's an internal responsibility of the leadership of the countries as well, because many young people also, they prefer to go, not they prefer, but they are forced to go to the extremist groups as well. Why? Because they are not feeling valued and recognized. So they are pushing or choosing to seek their recognition elsewhere. This will push them to go to the extremist group. And my question, just for the development agencies as well, because when you are putting a project in a country, do you take into consideration to consult also young people on how they perceive the priorities? Because sometimes the government's priorities in terms of project is widely different from how young people is seeing.
Let's put that question to Achim Steiner, because it's about development projects. Oh, yeah, Achim Steiner, I'll allow you to answer that question, and
Well,
then, yeah, the gong has sounded.
Very briefly, the answer to your last question is absolutely. I think sometimes it's difficult to find the space where young people feel safe to engage in this process, but let me tell you, we, for example, have done 2 major studies in the Sahel region where we interviewed either ex-combatants that have been reintegrated or people who are still in prison from Boko Haram and other movements, just to understand what are actually the triggers that drive them into joining these movements. Because there is sometimes the perception that they're just kidnapped and turned into child soldiers. That is another reality. But the harsh truth is that actually quite a number of these young people joined these movements because of the way that the state tried to deal with the threat of extremism. Seeing your village raided by a national defense force and essentially subjected to a very crude form of punishment can turn an entire community also against the state. So there are many different reasons. I just want to say one more thing on, if you allow me, Professor Höffler spoke about what are we going to do next year in the Hamburg Sustainability Conference. I'm very pleased to say to you, actually we will have an entire hub that will look at this question of crisis and conflict, development, peace building, because frankly, there are well over 50 countries in the world today that are in crisis. It is ironic that a development program such as UNDP today is almost expending half of its total expenditure in countries that are in conflict or in crisis.
Thank you very much. So we take that as an invitation to come back here next year to be part of the conversation. The gentleman in green, I'm sorry that I couldn't take your question. Dr. Anke Höffler, thank you very much for giving us your perspectives. And to my esteemed panelists, thank you very much. You have been fantastic. My audience as well. Thank you. This has been really insightful. The next session is going to start at 10. So we can continue networking and continue the conversation, but we need to leave this room right away. Thank you so much.